Welcome to the second half, to our second live panel here at the Bitcoin Future 2020 online conference. I am Leon Siegmund, your host for this show, and I'm very, very happy that you watch and listen and learn and hopefully share, because this event is free for everyone. The only thing you need to do is share the event so that your friends see it, and if you are one of these friends, then you need to have a friend that shares it so you can see the link where you can sign up, and then you sign up and then you see all the fantastic speakers, over 40 of a kind, great experts in the Bitcoin field. And we will go straight in the next panel with Katoshi B. So here she is. Welcome. I have to unmute you first. Welcome, Katoshi B. It's a great honor to have you on board. Please feel at home.
Hello.
Feel welcome. Hi there.
Hey. Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks for inviting. I think it's really a good initiative, and especially that it's online, especially when many people just can't go to many conferences. I think it's really cool to provide this online opportunity. Yeah, so thanks for making it.
Thank you so much for joining. You're right. I mean, the best part is that I can take a dive in the pool right behind me if I want to. So that's the idea, that we have the best speakers or some of the very best and brightest of the Bitcoin universe. But then you don't have to pay expensive flight tickets or hotels, but you just stay at home. So Katoshi, how's it going?
It's going pretty cool. Like in general, yeah, it's cool. Don't know what to say else.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe you're excited for Christmas. Maybe I don't know, maybe you're not excited for Christmas.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not so excited for Christmas because in my country, we don't really celebrate it. The New Year is more bigger for us. So I'm actually looking forward to New Year because, yeah, I just want this. It was quite a hard year, so I'm even happy that it ends, and it ends in a very positive way, but I'm looking forward to the new year because it feels to me that it's going to be huge.
Also for Bitcoin, I guess. Especially for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I hope. I think that every year for Bitcoin is positive, even despite the bear market. It becomes just stronger and stronger. I mean, it's still alive, so... Yeah, okay. Yeah, so basically, thanks for everyone who decided to join my talk. I think you will hear just another weird rant about suffering. Well, I'm joking, but not really. But I better call this talk like a thought experiment. And I decided to talk about citadels. And I think that this is quite a real thing. And I will try to explain the trends that actually move us forward to build citadels, if we actually just call them that word, but we can choose like a different, I think just different denominations for these societal structures. Yeah, so, and what I would like also to add that I think that moving towards like citadels structures is actually a healthy way of humanity progression. So maybe, yeah, we talked a little bit about me, but I made this presentation before. So I mentioned before that I was interested in some forms of citadels before. So yeah, I'm like, I would say that I'm a citadel habitant since 2008. And if I would be in a citadel and just, I think that you have to perceive this presentation also a little bit like a gamification, because that's how I would like to also just to empower your own creativity. So you just distract from the real world and think about more about like some kind of different life you would like to live. Yeah, so in my citadel, I would be just an exotic plants breeder and trade them to other citadels. This is just a small introduction. Yeah, so we all remember that meme, like you may wonder what is a citadel, and as it was described by the way how the author actually described it, like no governments, no taxation, some anarchic places, corruption, no inflation. I would say that this scenario is actually quite a failure if we talk about humanity progression. So basically this was presented as, yeah, now we have Bitcoin and now we have Citadel and this is like how we progressed. But actually, if you just calculate this scenario, I would think it would be just a total failure. And I think that Citadels could be really much more improved than what we have now, that what we have in this meme. So I think that this scenario would not likely to happen because in the end, you know, just society just would be wrecked totally. And I think that the situation described in that meme is what majority of people would call chaos. But they also forget that chaos and order are just one thing, and they cannot exist without each other. And the progress itself is just impossible without chaos. And when we say chaos, we mean anarchy, but anarchy doesn't necessarily mean like chaos, because it doesn't equal to chaos. And what I think else is that citadels by nature are actually an anarchic place themselves. And there is a big difference between different forms of governance. Basically, the governments can be centralized, is what we have now, but it also can be decentralized. And as well as there is a difference between authority and leadership. I think it's like what we put into the citadel and how we see it and how we want to build it is at first we have to feel this difference, like between the different forms of governance. It's a hard word today. Yeah, so, and I think that before we start to actually think about what can be our citadel, how many of them, and which citadel is suitable for you or for your group, I think it's really important to feel these differences and to understand that besides this is the anarchic movement, that anarchy itself is just a philosophical concept and not a political movement. And just a food for thought that without anarchy, things like internet or, for example, like mesh networks or 3D printing and even Bitcoin would be just impossible to imagine. So basically, like my questions are, should we build a citadel or should we build citadels? Like how many of them? And also, can we build functioning citadels? And my answer would be yes. But also if yes, so then why, what, and how? And this is the questions I will try to, well, maybe not to answer because I can't predict the future myself, but I will give you some food for thought and just give you some trends and ideas, and then you will be able just to define yourself, like what is your concept of citadel. Yeah, so basically to answer the question, what in fact is the citadel, I think you have to follow like the essence of the world itself. And for me, here are two main points. And let's just take a look where are the bases of the citadel future. So first of all, the world is centralized, but also the world is not homogeneous. The world is fractious, and it has, in general, like a fractal nature. Everywhere you will see the fractals, even if you take a look in yourself, and even if you just try to, I don't know, like to decode the thinking process of yourself, you will see that it has somewhat like decentralized and fractal structure. And also what you will see that the processes in the world, they always fluctuate, and you can easily see it yourself. For example, in the medieval ages, people lived like far away, super far away from each other. They were separated by large areas of forests. Then they became countries. Then we had like this super huge and proud nations. Then we still have these processes of globalization, which basically remove the focus from peculiarities and make our world one global structure. And there is always, like in every process, even if it's like centralized and even if you want to fit like this chaos in homogeneous process, you will always meet the point of bifurcation, because that's how it is just in the physics of our world. And as much as globalization exaggerates and manifests itself, as much we start to value the principle of locality. And basically, this is one of the trends we have and we see in our world today. Like you can see it, for example, in economics. You can, basically economics are just the biggest driver of our society. It just happened like this, that economics and money. And for example, what we see now, that's how our world looks right now. So basically, it's just divided on the 4 squares, which we call the political compass. And we always try to fit the world in these 4 squares. But is it correct? Is it right? If we have this like fractal structure, and if the processes are fluctuate, I mean, something works until it doesn't. And basically, this is how the world really looks. And just concentrate on that hypnotic thing, and just think about how many times you just wanted to do something else. Or, for example, you couldn't fit yourself into something because you just wanted to have a different opinion, or just because you have different aspirations, views, and ambitions. Maybe you don't like to be forced by this nature of life that we have. I would call it just an artificial structure of life with all our obligations and what we have to do daily. And your nature, just like mine, your, like everyone else, this nature is just like that hypnotic thing. So why we have to change it? Like if our nature is a little bit different, why we have these homogeneous societies and basically this like globalist world? And is it really good? Maybe it's what we have to do. But when we take a look closer at our lives, we actually see that it doesn't really fit our nature. And for example, like how just to describe our current lifestyle, because I would say just a caged, like somewhat caged lifestyle. With the growth of industrialization, humanity just was set to this 9-to-5 schedule. We are having just some crumbs of free time, just to use our creativity and simply to rest. But the fact is the vast majority of population around the world, I'm not even mentioning that there are still a lot of poor people, but also not many of us have those means for recreation. And what was created for us, I mean, it's just the most banal thing I can say, that for example, like TV was created as our recreation, but it's not the quality recreation, because you simply don't have time for anything else and for doing your own thing. And for example, escaping the wage slavery is also impossible for majority. And even just for the sufficient, like we call the self-sufficient part of population, but that's the only way. That's the only way we know how to earn some means for our lives. And just let yourself think, is there other way to have those means for living while being like meaningfully engaged with society? But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm just trying to push some leftist narratives and say that, yeah, we have to meaningfully engage with society. No, you can also be an individualist and still do your own thing. And for example, if you are a group of individualists, why not to build your own citadel? I mean, there can be so many different just concepts of citadels, and they can actually just live shoulder by shoulder, each with other. So yeah, and just look at the numbers. For example, that 38% of people around the world, they just think they perform something meaningless, and those are people who actually just gave their opinion. But I think there are much more people who think that probably they could spend their days somehow differently, but they just can't. And yeah, those people were just brave to admit the fact that their daily work activity just has no meaning. well, it's not only for them, but it's also for the society. And actually, people hate it. And if you're interested in this topic, I really recommend to read the book by David Graeber, which is called Bullshit Jobs. David Graeber is economist, and he is also anarchist, and he is also anthropologist. And I read about 3 of his books, and I really enjoyed every book. It has so many like quality research, so you will just understand the trends and the processes that happen in the world today better. So what we have else? Like besides the caged lifestyle, we also have this like what I would call caged brains. So basically, the critical thinking and creative thinking becomes like some kind of rarity, and those 2 things are not actually taught in schools. And I think that many of us can admit it. But actually, this is no wonder like that we lose those 2 most important things for that are needed for the global humanity progression with our like lifestyles we live, because everyone has creativity inside, and creativity is just like that cute hypnotic thing we saw some slides before, but it's just tamed by those homogeneous structures. And for example, what's even more how I would describe this world is just the repetition, because we always have this like because of that four square structure in our heads, we have this always like repeating itself, the political failure and also the economical failure, and in general like this life management, because we have to do like a lot of actions to fit into these like 4 squares. Basically, it just prevents, I would just say that it prevents the life itself. And yeah, as I said, that if we just try to forcibly tame that chaos, we just face the same results. And as I said, that something works until it doesn't. And unfortunately, we still stay within those same 4 squares every time. It's like entering the same 4 doors in a maze every time. And yeah, this is the core slide about suffering, that basically for many people, the life is just like suffering, debt, suffering. And then in the final episode, you just die. And then you're just expired. And really many people just ask themselves like, what have I done? How could I live my life better? And stuff. And life just is too much concentrated on producing a lot of things that we don't need. And for example, things like anonymous transactions and middleman exclusion are just the drop in this chaos. And Bitcoin is not only the future of money, it just makes, I would say, it makes people think about changing the concepts of life and like the low time preference, but also many people think about like Bitcoin just triggers a lot of things and probably thoughts that can enable the changes in life. And this is, I think you all know this. This is just simple numbers. You all know them. You have seen them, like the levels of poverty in the world, and also that the buying power of dollar constantly decreases, and also that inflation never stops, and the categories which contribute to inflation. But I never saw those numbers, for example, in relation to how we feel actually about our lives. And I was just curious, and I read a few researches about depression. And yeah, that's why I decided to mix them. And for example, 1 in 5 persons around the world is depressed. I think that's really a huge number. And those are the people who, once again, just were brave to admit that, yes, I have depression. But many people don't just try to dismiss this feeling of depression they have inside. But what is interesting here is that 50% of all economic costs of corporations, of those like 9 to 5 wage slavery, how I call it, are actually attributed to the absence of people from the work caused by depression. So basically, we try to escape our works, our jobs constantly. We are unhappy with our lives, and yeah, here we go, just sad and unhealthy. And the companies pay, and it's a good. I think it's a good cause when companies pay, but sometimes even we have to pay our medical bills. And basically, this is the main contributor to inflation. So to me, it seems like this system is cyclic and actually rotten because of those homogeneous structures that don't pay attention to peculiarities. And just to summarize all those things that, as I said, that like, for example, around the year 1000, really the biggest problem of humanity just was the Judgment Day. This just mind-blown minds of all the people around the world, especially in Europe. Yeah, but today, like the biggest problems, somehow we moved from the Judgment Day from to the debt, wars, unsustainability, and that existential crisis in general, as we saw on the previous slides. It's actually like really huge, and we need to think in the field of probably gamification and decentralization of life, just to find better meanings for value and just to compensate our opportunities that we lost on this way of industrialization and centralization of money. So here I'm coming closer to how. So just a few ideas about how could you start thinking about the citadels, and yeah, actually some good news about the current trends. So we will see how actually world already moves into that direction with some baby steps. So the first thing, how we actually saw this trend really a lot in our lives, especially with the growth of the internet. So which games are always popular? I mean, besides the fighters, when you need to cope with depression, aggression, with everything that annoys you in this world. So there is a big part of escapism in gamification. And the way just to receive new emotions and experiences that we lack in our everyday life, because our everyday life is actually also like homogeneous. So we perform all the same things, all the same actions every day. And why we are drawn to that kind of games? Because this globalization process just gives us unitary just at the essence of this world. And the world merges just in one big convenient landscape, but meanwhile it loses its uniqueness, and we actually lose it too. That's why we always feel uncomfortable, but we don't have means, or we don't have that much means just to express ourselves. And do we want to bring it back? I think yes, because we see those like technologies like AR, VR, they are just emerging today. But also the simulation games are popular because we want to change something, we want to create, and we want to escape. And for example, even today, you can see those games that were popular in 90s, just the text-based games, virtual reality, where you can feel yourself just a little bit different hero. But it's actually a very social game because you meet so many new people there, and you have just totally different space with super different rules. You have your own laws. I mean, just if you're interested, just go and read, for example, on Wiki just about the Mu games. One of them was Lambda Mu, and today we just see the revival. And here's just one example of the game which I spotted quite recently. It's New Tokyo. It's the Mu game, and yeah, basically you live like in 2199, and you are a citizen of this city, New Tokyo. Like you have your like your own rules, and you have to you have to comply and stuff. I mean, it's really interesting. If you're really interested, just go and try out. I think this is like I would call those things the virtual, maybe like the first attempt to create like some kind of citadels, but in the virtual reality. And the second game is Occupy White Walls. This is an MMO game, but it's also interesting because you can actually create like the different society inside of this game, but this game is art-based. But once again, this game, they told about this game even on TV, because I think it's quite mind-blowing games, and it's based on art. So imagine just a citadel where you have, I don't know, so many art galleries, and everyone is a painter and doing some art. I mean, yeah, I think it's just pretty interesting just to think about how could it look, and for example, yeah, just how could it work. But I think that everyone should define it just for themselves. And the second trend is that helps us to move towards citadels is decentralization, because decentralization actually talks about clusterization. And this is interesting because if we just imagine the world as many clusters, basically many citadels, yeah, so just the world decentralization itself became popular after the rise of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but in fact, this process takes place for decades, really, on the governmental level. And why decentralization is here? Because it should increase effectiveness of governance. And why? Because it focuses on local, exactly on the local diversities, richness, and needs, rather than that statist's one size fits all motto. And this includes, of course, political, financial, and social processes. And sometimes people are really annoyed by this decentralization word because it's just used over too much in that crypto, like general cryptocurrency space. But if you take a look, for example, at the current state, like, do we really have this decentralization the basis for decentralization structure? We really have it. If we take a look at 100 countries, we will spot that we have this 522,000 of subnational governments that actually do their own governance. But the problem with that subnational governments is that loans and debt securities just take the 68% of the total debt of the general finance of these subnational governments. So here is like the big, really the big question, like why it happens. So basically the debt is just distributed to these small decentralized structures, but it really shouldn't be like this. But because the world and the economics are just run around the debt, I mean, it just tells us once again that it shouldn't be like this, and that, I mean, that Bitcoin can really fix it. Yeah, so the big question. And I think that the main thing here is that cool animation. That this is not my debt. And if we just move towards further clusterization, we will see the better economical, political, and social decisions. Like once again, like why? Because we just will focus on our like local peculiarities and what we really want. And I've read a few researches, and it really works. For example, the results of decentralization, you can just check it yourself. For example, Asian Development Bank, they always publish these researches. Somehow they're super interested in the topic. Basically, decentralization improves everything, like education, some other services. Just the level of test scores, it even lowers mortality, like including the people in general, and also, for example, the infants' mortality. And also like just some super simple things that we need in our life, like access to water improves, and it just moves economics growing faster, and the poverty was reduced, and just the overall level of corruption was decreased. I mean, I would say this is just amazing results. And if we have this like really cool citadels that we build like we want, and they are decentralized and they're self-sufficient because we have just a different form of money and the different value. I mean, we can really progress better than if we would continue to live in the homogeneous structures. Yeah, and we're almost finished. So what I wanted to say once again that I think that for me citadels are like responsible anarchism. So basically we can deep dive and try to imagine like all the variety of unimaginable lifestyles, and we can start to deconstruct, for example, our current world and construct something else, at least in our mind. And I think this is kind of an exercise. For example, it's the same, the same exercise as imagine the color that does not exist. But regarding like the lifestyle and the citadel you would like to live in, just try to think how would you like it to be, and how would you solve every problem or issue that arises because of each change you would like to do. And just hint, you can't really imagine what cannot exist. So yeah, this is the final thing that what I would like to say, that I just defined for myself that I would call citadels the decentralized societal structures. And for example, for me, Bitcoin triggered it once again, because I'm really looking forward to the more effective society, to the more happy society. And yeah, I think that Bitcoin triggered this, but citadels will fix this. So what is your concept of citadel? It would be cool just to hear some of the feedback. And I think that for me, sometimes it would be cool just to brainstorm on the topic, and you can always reach me in Twitter. And you can see my Twitter handle. Just drop me a DM, and I would really be happy to find some new friends who like to think about the citadels, and maybe just to find the real application of citadels, and not only memes and not only fantasies. Thank you very much.
Awesome. That was a freaking awesome presentation. Thank you so much, Katoshi or Katja. Maybe you can end the screen share.
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely something a lot of us could relate to it. And I think it's an absolute honor to have such a presentation here on this conference, because yeah, it's not easy to, I mean, there's a lot of work in this presentation, obviously, but to express these things in a way that relates is a difficult challenge, and you've done exceptionally well. So it's an amazing. I was like, wow, this is really crazy. So one citadel we already have, and that is the Bitcoin Future 2020 party boat. And I welcome another guest here, which is Cory Klippsten. And Cory, last time we were together on your live stream, we talked about the TikTok citadel. So I think we can just open the discussion here. Maybe Cory, a quick introduction from you, and then I would say we talk a bit about citadels and gamification of the new clusters that were triggered by Bitcoin. I mean, the funny thing for me actually is that imagine a normie watches this now, right? So the initial idea of the conference was to make it easy for beginners, and now we're pretty meaningful. Is loaded with meaning here, but I think we can break it down.
We can break it down. We can also just take it up a level and just talk about, localization or cities as sort of an organizing structure that's more natural for humanity than some of the nationalism we've seen over the last 150 years, which is another interesting way to look at it.
Your sound is a little bit low. Could you put your microphone a little bit closer to the mouth, maybe, or something like
that? How's that, Lee?
Much better. Much better.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, it was interesting while I was listening to the tail end there of a very entertaining presentation. information, I was also scrolling through Twitter and I saw the announcement of the launch of Pronamos Ventures, so pronamos.vc. And it's basically like one of the seasteading guys with Balaji, Peter Thiel, Naval Ravikant, and a bunch of other people basically getting together to basically help cities take back their independence and start to see, or start new cities or find small cities and make them bigger, and essentially treat cities as a product that is actually supposed to recruit people and offer things for humans that are attractive and get them competing. I think that's a super interesting angle on this and dovetails very nicely with what you guys were just talking about.
So Katoshi, one question was that I had on your Twitter is this Be Water. Can you explain that a little bit, and maybe it relates to the presentation also?
I wouldn't say that it actually relates to presentation, but I think it's just a cool phrase by Bruce Lee. If someone just doesn't know. Yeah, I mean, he was a Kung Fu superstar, and I think
the last slide was about that only, I mean, freedom is sort of unsecure, right? And what gives you security is like a nanny state and like government control. But the problem is it's fake, right? So it's much better to be accepting that there is ultimately no security and ultimately you will die. And so it just makes sense to be open and don't try to hold on too much, but understand that, you know, like everything you try and do, at some point it will go away again. And I think if people would start realize that much of their materialistic achievements are actually nonsense, then maybe they would be much easier also to deal with like new paradigms such as Bitcoin. Because I'm here in the US, right? And here, of course, you know, a lot of people, they just want to have peace. They just want to have their retirement safe. And now Bitcoin comes, and it's a problem, because Bitcoin says, hey, look, there's a debt bubble. It might pop. The retirement scheme might pop. What you do then, right? Better stack some sets. So maybe we can have that as a trigger. Cory, what's your opinion on that maybe?
Yeah, so I'm thinking this through right now as we're thinking about how to. We just started raising money from venture investors instead of just sort of like Bitcoiners and angels, and trying to position, you know, a Bitcoin company like Give Bitcoin for people who may not necessarily be completely sold on Bitcoin yet.
Your sound still comes and goes higher and lower somehow. Maybe you can.
Why don't I just hold the mic right up to my face like this?
I think that's the security solution here. That's
All right.
the nanny state solution. Right. Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay, so yeah, I've been thinking about how to talk about Bitcoin for people who aren't already totally sold on it. And very selfishly, to raise money for our company, because you can raise some money from hardcore Bitcoiners, but Bitcoiners like to hold on to their Bitcoin. And so you've got to go and find out, you know, who else out there kind of buys some sort of story around it. And Tom Lee from Fundstrat, who's on CNBC in the US very often talking about Bitcoin, had a presentation that he did last year that was, I'm sorry, it wasn't even last year, it was the beginning of this year, it was probably like February. And it was basically just about how each generation has an asset class that they just align with and that they latch onto. So the silent generation, which in the US was the people that grew up during the Great Depression, and they saw, you know, gold get seized, and they saw the stock market and the bond market not deliver any returns for their entire lives. Basically, you know, when they hit their peak consumption years, gold was what they chose. And they, as soon as you could sort of buy gold, and the US went off the gold standard in 71, you saw like a 15x increase in the price of gold over the course of that decade. The next one was the baby boomers, and the baby boomers were the biggest consumers ever. And so if you were a baby boomer and you entered your consuming years in, you know, 82, and you consumed all the way through the peak, and the peak consumption year, the year that the boomers spent the most, was 1999. Not coincidentally, the peak of the stock market of that generation, before the crash in 2000 of tech stocks and 2001 of everything else. And so if you basically just owned a bunch of consumer stocks, you made off like a bandit and probably did like 100x in your portfolio. Similarly for Gen X, it was tech stocks. So it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, and just owning a basket of tech stocks. Even if 90 or 95 of your 100 stocks went to zero, you still absolutely crushed it on returns. So all of those have been bid up, like they're, essentially buying into one of those markets. It's already at its peak. It already has its believers. So millennials, the next generation, I'm not one, my wife is. I'm Gen X. I was supposed to make all my money in tech stocks. But it just kind of makes sense that millennials would be looking for a different asset to see appreciate and be the ones that adopt it early. And you see this over and over again in the studies, and just sort of the openness of millennials to Bitcoin, and how they're, it's the fifth, even just Grayscale, not even counting Bitcoin, just that one vehicle, Grayscale Investment Trust, is the fifth most popular holding of millennials in the US, behind, Netflix and Amazon. I think it's ahead of Netflix and Disney, and like behind Amazon and Google or something like that. So I just think that's a really fascinating way to think about this. And yeah, we don't want to pay off the debt that has been incurred by people that lined their own pockets and essentially pulled future consumption, forward into the present so they could enjoy it, and then stick us with the bill. There's something, I can't remember if it's Dan Tapiero or anyway, he's mentioned it. Raoul Powell's mentioned it as well, but it's not who actually said it first. I'll think about it. It was one of the guys that was on the Castle Island podcast recently. Anyway, he basically said that as far as if you take the delta between, in the US, the amount that someone pays into Social Security versus what they get out of it, on average, someone retiring today is getting like $300,000 more out of the Social Security than they put into it. But millennials, when they retire, are going to get $400,000 less. So basically every baby boomer, so this is like, you can say, okay, boomer, and yeah, that sounds like you're a jerk. And I obviously love my parents and have lots of boomer friends, and I want them to be Bitcoiners. But the fact is, the way that things have been structured in the US, which is the largest, most important economy in the world, is such that every boomer has $700,000 more than every millennial, just because. And that's just not fair. So yeah, I think millennials have every right to go on Twitter and say, okay, boomer, whenever they want to. They should be able to say it about 700,000 times.
Great. So, Katoshi, you still have some time with us, or?
I actually have to go. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's a pity. Then we need.
Yeah, sorry.
We have to discuss it ourselves then. Thank you so much for your contribution. I think we will. You may be available in our chat. So if people watch this live and wanna learn more or wanna discuss it, then just join in the chat, and you can take a look and join the discussion there. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Yeah. And thank you very much.
Have a nice Christmas time, despite you not celebrating it there.
Thanks. You too.
Don't forget to share the stream to educate people on Bitcoin.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Have a nice holidays, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. So maybe we can learn a little bit more about your way helping the millennials. Cory, what was the idea of Give Bitcoin?
Yeah, so Give Bitcoin was basically, we wanted to create a better way to onboard people into Bitcoin, and a better way for you to be able to, basically get friends and family involved. One of the most popular ways throughout the years has always been to give somebody some Bitcoin so that they have a little bit of, skin in the game. But it's just, it's a path that's fraught with risk and a lot of extra work. You usually end up being, kind of like Bitcoin IT support for life for the person that you gave to. And, you also have the risk of them losing it. So we basically decided to say, give plus time lock plus educate equals Bitcoin, or you give somebody some Bitcoin, you time lock it for a year, and over the next 12 months, we'll deliver a world-class education put together with some of the top Bitcoiners in the world, and basically bring them up to speed so they can, safely take custody of their Bitcoin and be a self-sovereign, hardcore Bitcoiner by the end of the year. So that's kind of the goal of Give Bitcoin. And then, Save Bitcoin, which we're coming out with in Q1, maybe as early as January, is basically just a millennials-focused savings app. Super simple, a couple of clicks, and you can start a repeat purchase, dollar cost average into Bitcoin. Super simple. We'll be live in 49 states on day one in the US and look to expand internationally over time as we get done with regulations and things like that. And that one, if you think of Give Bitcoin as being all about education, obviously there's an educational component to Save as well, but that one is a lot more about community and just kind of recognizing that, half the Bitcoin podcasters will say on almost every episode that they started a Bitcoin podcast so they could have Bitcoiners to talk to. And then, I often laugh with Bitcoiners I talk to, like, if you're into Harleys and you're into Bitcoin, you'd rather talk about Harleys with a Bitcoiner because you have this sort of like, Pierre and I talked about this on Noted last week, but that shared base of how you look at things. If you're going to talk about government, you'd probably rather talk about it with a Bitcoiner. If you're going to talk about, society and media and all kinds of things, some things, if you're into Bitcoin, are important and some things just aren't and will be totally different because of Bitcoin anyway. So, a lot of times, I'll see people talking about politics and I'm like, you guys are arguing from the 49th and 51st yard line, or, like right in the middle, and Bitcoin is like way over here and it's just going to make all of this chatter that you're talking about totally irrelevant. So that's kind of what we're thinking about. It's just like how to create community around Bitcoin and just leverage the Bitcoin community and just get millennials to stack sats like a beast the easiest way possible with like a right down the middle message that's not confused by being an exchange or a payments app or anything else. I know that's near and dear to Pierre's heart.
Awesome. That's a mission we share. And thankfully, we have two more guests that just joined, Pierre Rochard and Carvahlo. So maybe we can, again, take some time for the introduction because, again, we are targeting also people that don't have a Twitter handle, that don't have a Twitter account, and they're of course lost in keeping up to date. So maybe Pierre, who are you for someone who has never heard of you?
Yeah, sure. So I got interested in Bitcoin in 2013. I was a college student getting my graduate degree in accounting. And so my background before that, I'd been really interested in Austrian economics. I started reading about Austrian economics and especially the monetary economics and the macro stuff back when I was a junior in high school, which was like 2005, before even Bitcoin existed. So I became a gold bug and a silver bug. I was like an alt golder, I guess, and I was stacking silver and listening to Max Kaiser talking about taking down the JP Morgan conspiracy against silver and whatnot. And then when I heard about Bitcoin for the second time, the first time I heard about it in the context of the Silk Road, and that wasn't really interesting to me because I had a drug dealer already, so I didn't really need another person to talk to. It also just didn't sound like something that was interesting to me from a hard money perspective. I didn't know anything about the money supply or anything like that when I first heard about it, I think which was like 2011 or something from Slashdot. And then the second time I heard about it, the monetary policy was front and center because I was discussing issues of 100% reserve banking and sound money at UT Austin with Daniel Krawisz and Michael Goldstein. Daniel has since become a Craig Wright cult member, I guess. But in any case, Michael's still around. He's my co-host on the Noted podcast. And so we go way back. And what really struck me was this idea of having a limited supply that was algorithmically enforced with the difficulty adjustments and with the halvings. And it struck me that combined with the other advantages of being digital cash in general, that this would mean that Bitcoin would, its adoption was almost inevitable and that it would grow very quickly and that its value would also appreciate. So in hindsight, all of that turned out to be true. And I think that we're still on this rocket ship, still on the same trajectory. And the kind of the next 10X is going to be thanks to entrepreneurs like John, like Cory, who are getting even more new people in. So anyway, since I got my accounting degree, I got less and less interested in accounting and more interested in software development. So I dabble in all sorts of different Bitcoin and Lightning related projects, kind of running my own infrastructure and experimenting on my own. And then recently I joined Kraken, which is one of the biggest Bitcoin exchanges. And so there I'm just contributing in any way I can.
Great, thanks. So we move on to John.
Sure. My Bitcoin story is a little bit similar to Pierre's, but my background before Bitcoin is mostly in media-related interests like graphic design, branding, various advertising placement, etc. But I kind of phased all of that out of my life for a long time as I got more and more into playing with different Bitcoin things. I started around a similar time, late 2012, messed with everything, trading, mining, you name it. And then after doing some of my own kind of smaller projects, I finally joined Bitrefill about a year ago, where we're working pretty hard on solving advancing the inevitability of having a circular economy for Bitcoin. We want to see what we can do to make it happen faster and give people a kind of parallel opportunity to opt out of the current, paradigm of the banking system.
Great, awesome. So the initial presentation of this panel was an idea that we move on to from this huge welfare states, huge collectivist societies, and we go into smaller entities and citadels. And as you know, we are here, the Bitcoin Club Malta, which also has a citadel. So a fortress, actually on the smallest sister island of Malta, Gozo, there is a big citadel, and it has an interesting story. It was run over many times, and it always defended, and people could live inside, and like the Lord was there and stuff like that. Now Malta has been in the news recently because of a few shady activities, so to speak. So it has been in the news for passport inflation of the prime minister, perhaps to take care of the prime minister's own retirement fund, and also some journalists that had their car on fire at some point, and also because of Malta becoming the blockchain island. So there was the attempt, the prime minister in 2017, Joseph Muscat, he had a talk at some forum, and he said Malta should be a Bitcoin island and Europe should be a Bitcoin continent. So I would like to open the discussion now for the whole panel. And since we have like these great minds here gathered, form a little spontaneous task force to consult the Maltese people, the Maltese population, as well as business leaders, thought leaders, and even the government. What, guys, would you suggest? How could Malta see the potential of Bitcoin, and what could be good implementation steps? And in general, like what are the key factors why a country like Malta could gain a big benefit from it?
I think it's pretty tricky to, take the beginning of your question where you're saying, there's basically corruption and figure out how to like fix corruption with blockchain. That's, a tall order. But I think generally speaking, incorporating Bitcoin into the economics of the system is going to eventually cause, things to gravitate towards more properly aligned incentives. I don't know how quickly that phenomenon will affect things like removing corruption from people in power over the jurisdictions in question, but I do think that it helps set things on the right course.
Okay, so maybe we move to Cory, as he also mentioned he is short in time now. So what would you suggest? Should we make a campaign for Give Bitcoin and equip Maltese people with some Satoshis?
Honestly, probably the highest impact effort is probably trying to block new regulations and reduce or remove any existing regulations that sort of stop the usage and spread of Bitcoin. That's something that you can actually organize for, and you can sort of, recruit politicians to your cause one by one, especially in a smaller entity like Malta than what you might be dealing with in a place like the US or Germany or something like that. So it does seem like you could have a real impact on regulation there. And that's probably where I'd focus my efforts, in addition to like the evangelism. But like in general, like Bitcoin going to do what Bitcoin's going to do, as long as you don't have governments putting their boot on the neck of people trying to use and spread Bitcoin.
Great. By the way, do you know how I switch back to the automated switch between the slides here, between the windows? Because it seems like it's stuck on my...
You should be able to hit speaker view in the top right.
I don't seem to find it.
It's right by the full screen button in the top right.
Problem is, I have the host on my phone. Ah, I think I got it. We do it like that, maybe. So Cory, are you short in time now? Do you have to leave? Then I'll say goodbye, or you still can join the panel a bit?
I've got another 15 minutes.
All right, that's good. Then Pierre, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so on the earlier comment about the citadels, I'm actually not really a fan of that meme. I know people have different interpretations of it, but my understanding of it comes from the original post that was written about it, which was kind of a dystopian view of Bitcoiners having to separate themselves from the rest of society. I think that it was written by a Keynesian and who didn't really understand the underlying economics. And what's more realistic is that it is governments that are regressive and anti-Bitcoin who will have to increasingly isolate themselves from the rest of the world. Because it's actually, if you look at this principle in monetary economics, it's called the impossible trinity. And the three things that you can only pick two are free capital flow, fixed exchange rate, and sovereign monetary policy. So what Bitcoin picks is free capital flow and sovereign monetary policy. It does not have a fixed exchange rate, which is where it's so volatile and people complain about that. But the consequence of that is that if you don't want Bitcoin in your society, you must not have free capital flow. And so we see this in China, for example. They don't have free capital flow. They have strong capital controls. And in order to enforce capital controls, you have to have a surveillance society. You have to have a form of totalitarianism because you cannot have due process, right? All property has to be seized in a somewhat arbitrary manner when it's crossing the border. If it's not to the liking of the authorities, everything has to get approved by the central bank or some kind of currency board and whatnot. So in any case, it is countries that don't like Bitcoin, that don't want Bitcoin, that will have to transform themselves into citadels that are isolated from global prosperity and free trade. So that's kind of where I see that heading already. And so I think that the facts already prove that. And then in jurisdictions that are pro-Bitcoin, what we see is the opposite, where they're trying to become more cosmopolitan, bring in new people, and create economic growth. And so, for example, here in the United States, we see that with Wyoming. Wyoming has created a lot of legislation that is very friendly towards Bitcoin and Bitcoin-related businesses. And so they're doing that not because they want to isolate themselves from the rest of the world, quite the opposite. They're doing that because they want to attract talent, they want to attract new ideas and new businesses. So I think that the Citadel idea is kind of warped in that regard because it was created by someone who was anti-Bitcoin. So I'm on board with reappropriating memes. We did that with Bitcoin maximalism. And so, sure, we can do that with Citadels, but I just want to be clear that in no way do I think Bitcoiners are antisocial or will have to, retreat to the mountains or anything like that. Quite the opposite. It's the Keynesians who, if they want to maintain their economically irrational system, they have to increasingly isolate themselves and put themselves into camps and keep others away. So that's if Malta wants to become a leader, I think that the first thing is that you got to get rid of fractional reserve banking. And so that's in Wyoming, they passed a new form of bank called a SPDI, Special Purpose Depository Institution, which is a 100% reserve bank. And so once you get rid of the fractional reserve banking, then you can actually have a much more open market in banking services, because you don't have to worry about the banking system overextending themselves and getting into problems like we saw in 2013 in Cyprus, where you had to have the bank bail-in. So fractional reserve banking actually creates pressure for governments to intervene. We're seeing this in Lebanon currently, where they had a fractional reserve banking system. It inevitably becomes corrupted, and people start lending to their friends and whatnot, and to the government as well, and to politicians who are trying to get reelected. So yeah, step number one of getting rid of corruption is to get rid of fractional reserve banking, or at the very least, create an alternative to it, right? Like this SPDI vehicle in Wyoming. And then from there, once you have kind of a clean banking system, then money flow can go in and out of Bitcoin much more easily, and without you really having to worry about the stability of your financial system, because the financial system would just finance itself on the free market rather than abusing depositor funds.
Yeah, another
Right.
aspect of the citadels I don't really like, with, like, as you mentioned, like being dystopian. There's a very you know, obvious undertone of elitism, like Bitcoiners are better, they're smarter and better than everybody else, and we're going to end up super rich and being able to have, you know, evil castles where everybody else is excluded. And I don't really think that's part of the plan or goal or even design or motivation or feature of Bitcoin, you know?
I also don't think that it's reflected in the data. Like if you look at the HODL waves, the on-chain data, you see during the parabolic up moves that there are a lot of people who held for like 2 or 3 years who do sell, because they're essentially rebalancing. You know, becoming a billionaire is nice in theory, but when you reach like 10 million or 50 million, you start like changing the way you think about risk and the way you're thinking about how much Bitcoin you want to hold. And so I think that there's a natural process of like accumulation and then distribution, which happens with these HODL waves, and it'll continue to happen going forward. Now, there are like hodlers of last resort who will never sell, or you know, they're going to wait a very long time, but they seem to be in the minority so far. And even if they don't sell, that means that they're not spending their money on building a citadel anyway. So I don't, it's kind of contradictory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin isn't. We don't think Bitcoin is going to become more isolated, right? Like, if we're going to have a citadel, it would kind of like start forming now, and we would already see, you know, a real niche culture and behavior. And that's, I mean, you can say that's maybe what's happening in crypto Twitter sometimes, but that's really like a pretty narrow view.
I think that for whatever reason, even if it started out as a dystopian post, the meme does have legs, and I tend to like to see the glass half full, and to just basically, I just kind of try to co-opt the meme and turn it into more about localism and more about, you know, cities as an organizing structure for society. And, you know, Bitcoiners, I think a lot of times you watch, you know, you hang out on like, you know, Telegram groups with taco clubs, or just kind of hang out on Twitter later in the evening when the Gen Z kids are on talking about Bitcoin. Like, I think they just kind of want to hang out with people who share their values. And I think that, you know, local municipalities having a lot of power, you know, versus the national government or state government or whatever, is something that people kind of want. They want to be close to their neighbors, and they want to care about their communities, and they want to feel like, you know, anything that they are paying back into the pot that's used for like shared services, you know, goes to people that, you know, share some commonality or some values, or like live close to them geographically. I mean, you know, anywhere that you find people, you know, sending a bunch of money away to people that they never see or talk to, especially when a government is trying to actually actively divide them, whether this is like Madrileños and Catalonians, or, you know, red states and blue states, or whatever it is, you know, that's not cool. And I think I choose to see the Citadel meme as more around sort of like just wanting to find your community, even if there's like ridiculous amounts of diversity between communities. The point is, you'd much rather, fund a road that doesn't go to your house if you still have some commonality with those people. And the great thing is Bitcoin still on an economic basis will connect all of those communities and make the capital free flowing because it goes, near costless over the internet, and we're all using the same unit of account and medium of exchange. And so we can have this giant, huge global economy without all having to have one world government. That's how I see Citadels.
Yeah, I do my best to stay out of politics and political discussions and things that are really predictive. And I think that like Bitcoin's effect on the power structures of how humanity organizes like itself, I think it could be like well beyond my lifetime before there's like significant impact. So I try not to predict too much, but I definitely like the perspective that you added to it, because yes, I would like to see smaller governments and a more decentralized world on that kind of level. But I don't know that, I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to see huge change. I think we'll probably see in my lifetime like maybe huge power shifts across countries, like where maybe like say a country like Malta becomes more powerful because it got things right early with Bitcoin or something like this. But I think we're going to have major government powers for a very long time, and it might even be the kind of efficient form, natural form for humans. And just because Bitcoin may fix things, we may end up with just like an iteration of government, and it still might look very similar for a very long time.
What we can see is the effect that the USD fiat standard has had on centralization globally. And so I think that like the reason the US has emerged as the singular superpower is because in monetary economics, there's this phenomenon of converging on kind of one global unit of account, which has turned out to be the USD due to a historical accident. I think, World War II and World War I, basically. But that ever since then, it's been a steady trend of centralization, both within the United States, with like from states to the federal government, and then globally from other nations to the US federal government and NATO, and is kind of an example of that. And so, I would argue that that's because the Federal Reserve belongs to the US federal government, and that's kind of the source of a lot of the centralizing influence over the past half century. But yeah, I agree. It's kind of a crapshoot to try to predict where it's going to go with Bitcoin.
But we can see evidence. We can see consolidation in monies, like you said, not just to the dollar, but even like below that rank, where you have like a lot of gravity towards the euro, and different political effects of having that money now condensing a huge part of the continent. You hear in Romania, for example, like there's a whole game being played with pushing back when we adopt the euro here. And, I suspect that there's a game being played that way because they want to be able to print their own money for longer. And they don't want to capitulate to this efficiency. And I think also Bitcoin is taking up the lower end of that spectrum, where we're seeing consolidation in money, where we're having like countries with really the weakest, fiat starting, their populations are starting to convert to Bitcoin. So yeah, I think we have evidence. I just don't know how much and how quickly it will affect actual government power structures.
I have to say my favorite thing about this panel so far is watching John's shadow do talking with his hands, but not actually being able to see his hands. So I'm like watching this still face, but then there's all these hand movements with this. It's awesome. So it's interesting. Yeah, I'm not trying to predict anything as much as work toward. I think it is worth working toward. And I think that's, essentially what all the folks are trying to do up in Wyoming. And it's certainly what I try to, influence in my interactions with people on a daily basis is, head toward localism and centralization as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing we can do in the end, like if we want to help Bitcoin, is just accelerate what we feel is inevitable about it. That's we can do that, and we can do that in profitable ways. We can do that in volunteer ways, etc.
Yeah, but honestly, like if you're working in Bitcoin, like all three of us are, I mean, probably the best thing we can do to bring about localism is just push Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, that's always been tricky for me. Like there's a part of me, like every Bitcoiner, that wants to go out there and tell everybody, you know, you're missing out, you have to have it, blah, blah, blah. But I don't like, you know, bordering on investment advice. And I don't think people are really that great at managing their money and their savings and budgeting. And so it's like, I don't know. I have to focus my efforts where I feel like I'm the most effective. And I try to stay away from you know, evangelizing Bitcoin or making a crusade as far as putting Bitcoin in everybody's hands. I'm certainly happy to help clarify things once they're here or once they see utility, but I try to stay away from that. Not because I think it's a bad thing, but because so many people that behave similarly are doing bad things, like promoting shitcoins and, you know, investment scams and all this stuff. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think you're definitely on a better path than most, you know, with doing the Give Bitcoin thing and, you know, trying to mint, you know, Bitcoiners that actually know what they're doing and know what the value proposition is. But I don't know. Like I never felt the need to where we have to like have this like urgency to get everybody in here. Yeah, it might make us all a little more rich and spare a lot of people from the loss of fiat money. But I think there's also going to be a lot of pain when you make abrupt disruption. And, you know, somebody has to be on the losing end of that power shift, of that economic shift.
So the second thing is definitely not a given. And I think some of what Safety has been talking about a lot recently, and what Nick Bhatia has been kind of a rising star thinker, coming over from the world of finance and academia, kind of working in Bitcoin, you know, talking about how Bitcoin could actually have more of a soft landing, or really like US fiat could have more of a soft landing as Bitcoin rises, and that there isn't necessarily going to be just like, you know, Weimar Republic style inflation for the dollar at some point, that it actually could just exist alongside of Bitcoin for another century or something like that, and just like slowly inflate away. Which is probably in the interest of the US anyway, with over $200 trillion of real liabilities. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as like evangelizing, like, so here's probably the strongest argument for that. If bringing Bitcoin to the point where enough people around the world recognize that they can, you know, be self-sovereign with, you know, some decent portion of their wealth, helps even one country avoid an incident of hyperinflation, then it's absolutely worth it. And I think this was probably an Andreas point, you know, 5-6 years ago. So I always kind of come back to that. Like, if I actually do feel a sense of urgency, I do want Bitcoin to be everywhere and understood by everyone as soon as possible, because just saving hundreds of thousands or millions of lives from avoiding like awful famine in 2 or 3 countries in the decades, you know, call it like, let's make Bitcoin happen 2 decades faster than it otherwise would. You can literally save millions of lives by doing that.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I'm glad somebody's working on it.
We'll gladly hand them off to you when we're done making Bitcoiners, and they need to, you know, work in the circular.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe feel a little hypocritical because I do have like a vision for Bitcoin where I think it ends up, you know, very similar looking to probably yours. But I guess maybe I'm approaching it more from a business and product standpoint for now. But I do feel like what I actually want is I want people, you know, connecting themselves into a totally, you know, separate economy and totally opting out of everything, and that forcing the old kind of economy to kind of have to act responsibly and act ethically and act, you know, rationally, basically, and not be able to oppress people with fiat money, etc. So, you know, I think that if we can build this whole environment where, you know, you can safely enter and live your life and have everything you need, that once you have that as a competitive alternative to the whole banking paradigm, to credit cards, to loans, to, you know, all of the things they're doing with fiat money and fractional reserve banking, etc., I think it just eventually sucks all the life out of it. It's like, it's a total counterbalance to fiat money. It's like a big black hole that's just going to keep having more and more gravity against it.
Okay, great answers from all of you. Thank you. I think a big problem is that people right now have, they're really after the fast money, right? And then if you tell them, look, with Bitcoin, you don't make fast money, you probably will lose a lot of money if you're after the money. But if you see the long-term trend, then maybe it's very good, and that's maybe hard to convince people. That's why I think, yeah, Cory's approach is really smart. But let's talk about the halving next year, because that might be another trigger for many more people to be on board and to catch attention, or to see that Bitcoin is still not dead. So what is your expectation for the halving? Will it trigger another big peak in price, or what else could happen?
Pierre
I think there's
loves
always.
Go ahead, John. Sorry.
I was just waiting for somebody else to start. I think there's always the chance that I could wake up any morning and just be like, what the hell just happened to the Bitcoin price? And just see some kind of monstrous rise. Having or not, I think that's always a possibility. And having just sort of kind of makes that more likely, or that kind of effect more likely within the kind of year surrounding the halving. But yeah, the liquidity of Bitcoin, that's available for purchase is like super small. It's, yeah, we have something like 18 million already mined, but the amount that actually moves with any recency is like maybe somewhere like 2 or 3 million probably in the past year. So you're talking about only needing, a few large entities decide to take a Bitcoin position on the long term to have like a dramatic effect on the supply. And then if you exacerbate that with a halving, yeah, I think this time around, maybe a lot more of the Bitcoin world was like kind of more aware of it. And so maybe that's why, like, we saw this kind of pretty decent pump we had from the bottom from 3,000 to like $14,000. That may have been people, having some overconfidence and maybe not overconfidence, but experience with Bitcoin cycles and more confidence to be able to hold through a bottom at 3,000 from 20,000. And maybe that caused a little more volatility on the upside and downside this year. But I think that I don't think it's fully priced in. I think that, sometime before or after, sometime in 2020, we'll see the real effect of the actual supply change. And, predicting prices isn't really that fun, but I do think somewhere around where we are now is probably bottoming, and within the first quarter of next year, we should start to stabilize more towards regaining 20K, et cetera, by the end of the year, hopefully.
Yeah, I guess I'll preface this with like Bitcoin's fundamentals, the permissionless nature, the censorship resistance, the seizure resistance, are all kind of like table stakes for its value. Without those, I don't think that many of us would be interested in it, because even if the value went up and it wasn't seizure resistant, then the government would just take it. So like they did in some circumstances with gold or with bank accounts or whatever it is. So just to get that out of the way, because I know that when we start talking about price, people are like, oh, why aren't you talking about fundamentals? It's like, all right, let's talk about fundamentals. And we just did. Now we can talk about price. And so I'm not a statistician and I'm not a quant, but I do pay attention to what they're saying and what they're coming up with, because before this year, Saifedean Ammous had written a book, The Bitcoin Standard. In it, he talks about the stock to flow ratio from kind of an Austrian economics perspective, and a very qualitative perspective of, hey, look, just look at the outstanding supply, compare it to how much new supply is coming in the market from mining specifically, not from old buyers selling. And that kind of gives you an idea for the hardness or the soundness of a money, which might translate into its price, its exchange rate on the market. And so I didn't find it to be particularly controversial. It seemed kind of like, self-evidently, probably true. But this year, we had a quant named Plan B, he's pseudonymous, come out with this price model where basically he found that there's a relationship, a correlation specifically. We don't know if it's causation or not yet, or we might never, but that there is a historical correlation between Bitcoin's price and the stock to flow ratio. And it's not like a real-time thing where it's like, oh, at the halving, the price pumped. There's a significant lag between the stock to flow ratio and the price. So after a halving, one could expect, based on past data, that the value or the price of Bitcoin is going to go up. Now, how much it goes up or what the specific timing, like that's impossible to predict. And this model doesn't try to predict that. It's just trying to set some boundaries for the future price. And so I think that it might be like 18 months, it might be a couple of years, or maybe the model has kind of changed because the halving is getting smaller and smaller. And so it's having an increasingly marginal effect on price. Maybe it'll be like years before we see the price pump or whatever. So I don't want to get people's expectations up of like getting rich quick or anything like that. But yeah, that's basically like the way I think about it is historically the halving has caused the price to go up eventually, just based on the math of it. Now, it's also true that in between halvings, Bitcoin's stock to flow ratio is also increasing. Now, obviously, there's kind of a discontinuity at the halving, and it jumps up significantly. But even between it is increasing. And so I would expect Bitcoin's price to kind of just generally drift upwards. And that's been true, except for the situations where Bitcoin's price has gone parabolic due to a halving, and then it crashes down. And so it's outside of those parabolic moves, kind of just steadily drifts upwards or sideways has been the historical record. Now, I think that there are fundamentals that could change, for example, that would cause this quantitative model to break. So, for example, like if there was a fundamental flaw discovered in Bitcoin, an unknown, something that we can't even predict today, not something like predictable like quantum computing or something like that, but just something I can't even verbalize now because I don't have the imagination or creativity. That could cause Bitcoin's price to go down 90% or go down 100%. There's no way to know. And then we just kind of have to, on a personal level, you have to manage that downside risk and make sure you're not like 100% in, like leveraged to the hilt, and going balls deep into it. Now, I think that there's you also have to be managing the risk with the fiat system. So like the fiat system also has unknown unknowns, right? So US dollar could go to zero as well. So we can't put a quantitative number on it just because these aren't actuarial things, right? You can kind of look at all fiat currencies and you can see, oh, they have a lifespan of X, Y, and Z. I don't think that's a good heuristic to apply to the US dollar specifically because it's kind of unprecedented as a fiat global reserve currency. It could just go on for quite a while longer than we would otherwise expect, just based on other, like the US dollar probably should not be compared to the Zimbabwe dollar, even though they have similarities. If you're trying to estimate its lifespan, probably not a good idea to do that. So yeah, that's just all I have to ramble on about that.
I'll add one thing into the mix, and this just comes from being friends with traders for the last 20 years and spending a lot of time with traders still, and being an LP in an active trading Bitcoin fund and kind of having good access to this. There's so much more professional trading volume in the market now than there was, let's say heading into 2017, like at least an order of magnitude more professional trading volume, longing, shorting, using leverage, the tools that they have, the venues that they have. Most of these things didn't exist, at scale. BitMEX was just kind of getting going, and you've got, FTX and, CME and Backed and like all these different places, Deribit. There's so many different places that they can put their strategies to work on. And I think basically what happens is they really like to trade, they like volatility within a range. They want to, basically have Bitcoin bounce around as much as possible. And they want to make money when it goes up, and they want to make money when it goes down, and they want to put it on straddles and butterflies and all these different things that people know from options trading in the last decades. And I think the net effect of that is I think what it actually is doing is keeping Bitcoin a bit lower than it otherwise would be. And meanwhile, all of the sat stackers and all of the hodlers of last resort are picking up what we now perceive to be as cheap Bitcoin. And I think the net effect of it will be that interplay between hodlers scooping up the artificially low Bitcoin is creating a much tighter spring coil than otherwise would be. So I don't know. I personally, just kind of thinking about my own, risk reward and thinking about how much Bitcoin to hold and things like that, and like what to work on professionally and things like that. I actually think most people are underestimating what's probably going to happen in the next few years. I won't put a number on that, but let's just say I think people are drastically underestimating broadly what will happen with Bitcoin. And I guess this sort of this artificial smoothness with, probably an uncoiling to the upside is kind of like the same thing as, it's the opposite. It's a call option function instead of sort of the put option function that we generally have with, the US fiat system and our QE inflated markets, where you kind of have like steady, 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 and then there's a huge crash. It's kind of the opposite. I see this being like artificially steady and held down. And then, at some point there's no more coins to borrow for shorting and you just go up. Anyway,
I do think it would have been interesting to see, an alternate reality where Bitcoin was designed to only gradually decrease the block reward instead of every, 4 years or so. I wonder if it would have been better or worse, or what kind of effect it would have on the price, if it would have been less volatile or what. Probably not much different in the end, but it would have been interesting. And I definitely agree with something specific that you said, which is like acting like a spring, like a coil. I think that if there are people out there that are having any kind of artificial price suppression effect on Bitcoin, that does mean that the pumps will be even stronger when it recovers, and we'll overshoot very hard, very much like we did in 2017, where like going from, I remember finally getting back to 1,000 and thinking, wow, we're back at 1,000. Okay, so we'll probably have to hang out here for a while, and I'll have some time to buy some Bitcoin. And then it just like went up for a year and a half or something. And all of a sudden we were at 20,000, and then all of a sudden we were at 3,000 again. So I do think that's like there was some kind of huge, suppression going on, and the supply shock with the halving, it just combined to like a total overshoot and extreme volatility. And we could easily see that happen within the next 1 to 5 years, where we just go from one day, wake up, and yesterday it was 15,000, and then the next day it's at 80,000. You're like, what the hell just happened? And then it's back at 20,000, and things could get crazy when there's not a lot of liquidity on the market.
Okay, great, thanks. So as a last question to the panel, I would like to talk a bit about hyper-Bitcoinization. And I think everyone, although, Bitcoiners don't like to predict the future too much, everyone might have, some fantasy, some sci-fi dreams. So please share what you're gonna do with when you're retired on Bitcoin, perhaps, and a few years down the line we have a global standard for money, which is Bitcoin. So what else would you do if not advancing Bitcoin?
Well, I think all 4 of us are getting together next summer off the coast of Malta and having a boating accident. So I don't actually.
Lost your mic there.
I was muted. Oh, I said, I think the 4 of us are getting together next summer on a boat off the coast of Malta and having a boating accident, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it as Bitcoin's going to make me rich one day and I'm going to retire and walk away. I mean, every year that I've been in Bitcoin, I've only gone deeper. I've never like found myself walking away. I feel like if Bitcoin and being a part of all this provides me more resources and buying power and power in general, I think I will just continue to leverage it even more to continue to contribute to making, my vision, our vision for what a post-Bitcoin world really should look like.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, I got interested in Bitcoin because I was interested in sound money beforehand. And so like my thesis is that sound money is good for civilization, and it will be an enormous boon when we move to the Bitcoin standard and away from the US dollar and whatnot. So after that happens, whether I'll continue to be interested in Bitcoin or not, kind of a crapshoot. I don't think so, honestly. I think that there's other big problems as well that I'm also interested in. So I'm also interested in ocean research. I love the ocean. I love space research as well. Just haven't had really any time to devote to it because there's like this big elephant in the room of monetary policy, basically. But yeah, something I'd really like to do is build an army of robots that picks up trash. I think that's my next mega project after Bitcoin.
All right, then I definitely will invite you, or we will clearly invite you for the next Bitcoin Future online conference, or actually probably won't do an online conference or just an online conference on top of a boat conference, so that we can practice losing private keys.
Proper key management.
Exactly right. So, and Malta is the perfect place with its image already, and yeah, a lot of boating fun there for sure. We can organize that. So thank you so much to everyone for being part of this. I appreciate your time and your clever insights, and I hope to see you next year. Best of success with whatever you are producing at the moment or working on at the moment, and nice festive season for you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thanks for having us. Have a great holiday.
Thanks. So if you liked what you just listened to, then you can do us a favor and spread this Christmas gift to each and everyone that you know, or that you would love to get in touch with this information or this conference. And the conference is fully free to attend for everyone. So you can put it under the Christmas tree as a virtual gift. No gift is more important than that of education and learning. So please share it with your loved ones, with your friends and colleagues. And I appreciate your viewing, your listening a lot, your participation. It's the first time that we organized this event, and it's been a big pleasure putting it together with so many great Bitcoin speakers. And yeah, we really hope you enjoyed what you saw, and welcome your feedback. So please message us if you have questions, or if you have ideas, if you want to maybe even contribute in some way or help us for the next one. And yeah, it's been a really fantastic first time for us hosting a Bitcoin online conference. And we definitely will continue to spread this, because it is kind of, I think, an endless, or at least definitely a lifetime project for everyone that believes in Bitcoin, to help educate the people, help educate people around you. And so that's it for now. We will still have the conference live online, where besides all these, the 2 live panels that we had now, all the beautiful contributions, all the great presentations, keynotes, interviews are listed. So get your ticket if you don't have one, share it with your friends, gift a ticket to a friend or a family member or a colleague or a client or a business partner. And I wish you a great festive season.